G'day everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing series of podcasts around this thing called leadership. Thank you for joining me once again. And today I am continuing the series around Australian entrepreneurs. By way of introduction, today's podcast guest is currently a lecturer with Federation University Australia and is also the startup founder of Green Lab Futures. Welcome to the podcast, Scott Douglas. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, very good. Thanks very much for having me.
No worries, mate. Look, I appreciate your time. And as always, I will start this podcast where I have to start and at the beginning with the question, why become an entrepreneur, mate?
I think from an early age, I was 18, 19. I was always, I had side hustles, and the side hustles were, for me, a way of kind of raising enough funds for me to buy my first car, go on my first kind of holiday with mates where we went to Bali, and I came back with kind of this, I suppose, inspiration to want to study entrepreneurship at the time, which was at RMIT. And after having a few side hustles, I got to RMIT with a portfolio of ventures, and they, after a process, allowed me kind of entrance into their Bachelor of Business course as a mature age student. And I then started to really grapple with this concept of are entrepreneurs born or are they made? Very similar to the leadership style scenario, but I think after 4 years of study there, I really resonated with that question more because I had a deep passion for entrepreneurship. I found that this fire was motivating me to pursue my own kind of goals and as opposed to working within organisations. But at that time when I graduated, I felt that I needed to have a backup gig, and my backup gig was teaching. So I jumped into the vocational space from an early age and taught within the fitness, within the sport management space, moving into the business space, which is where I've kind of built a 13, 14 year career now within the dual sector space. So both in vocational and higher ed. Along that journey, I set up my own educational startup. It was an educational group that I developed. I say we because it was much easier as a young startup to frame the startup as a we, because people would often ask me, who else are you doing this with? And I've kind of always used that in the way that I describe what I'm doing, because it's not just me, it's me and my wife, but it's me and the team that I have at the time. So I've used education as, I suppose, as a backup pathway for myself, and then I've continued to pursue my entrepreneurial ventures, which has, I suppose, been my really true passion in the business world.
When you said you had side hustles, and I've heard this quite a bit from people that I've interviewed offline and just having discussions about how they got to where they got to, was the side hustle something that came to you instinctively, or did you see other people do it and you went, yeah, this is I've got my 9 to 5 gig, or I'm studying, but I need to do something else on the side? Was there just a drive to keep busy, or you had a strategic goal in mind? Like what was the motivator there?
Oh, look, my first main side hustle was hosting parties to my parents' displeasure. I hosted the dead party, and we set it up in a way that we sold tickets for an after party to loan or access land off my parents on their 5 acreage, so that we could have a safe party. And then it continued, not at their house, of course, because I got grounded for about 12 months after that. But that was a bit of an approach that I took. And then, like, my first job was working at a video store from the age of 15 through to 21. And my second startup was based on what I saw a lot of American people doing in American movies, which was dog walking. So I set up a dog walking pet care service in Gippsland, where I would walk people's dogs, and I developed my pricing model off the price of a new release movie, which was $7.50. So for a walk, I would charge people $7.50. I'd try and get about 3 or 4 dogs together, so it was worth my while as an 18, 19-year-old to make $20 to $30 an hour. And that was where my first venture kicked off. I then scaled that business where I brought in younger dog walkers, so I was able to to have them walk, and I was able to take a percentage cut of what they were earning. And then I started to look after people's houses. I started to offer home and care maintenance when they were going on long holidays. And after 6 months, I had a business model that was keeping me pretty busy and pretty occupied, along with my 4 walkers. So that kind of kicked things off in the Latrobe Valley. I then had a few other ideas that just kind of popped into mind, and one was getting the local town map and then selling advertising around the outside of the map so that we could kind of promote our dog walking services. And as a young kind of entrepreneur, I attended a meeting with a couple of very interested radio station executives that were keen to hear my ideas. And after I pitched all of my ideas, I left the meeting, all unsuccessful. 6 months later, they ran with pretty much all of those ideas. So I learned from a really quick experience at a young age that I needed to have a lot more nous around the way that I kind of trusted this concept of ideation, and got burnt. So didn't learn to be distrusting, but always just asked questions and was diligent in what it was that I was doing.
So let me ask you, Scott, and I'm interested in this one because you've seen that you've had multiple different careers and set up multiple different businesses. Do you see a difference between the leadership and entrepreneur function?
Yeah, look, that's probably an area that I've just recently been kind of studying within my MBA course, and I've really explored this, I suppose, this notion of the leaders that we had compared to the leaders that we need in the future, and how innovation and entrepreneurs kind of fit into that puzzle, because I do see, and again, based on some of the discussion articles that we looked at, this real shift away from that traditional leadership model towards somebody that is, should we say, transformational, or even willing to share the role of leaders, of the leader. Like, I find that entrepreneurs aren't always the people that are wanting to sit at the top of the organisation. They're always wanting to continually evolve and innovate. And I think from my perspective and my experience, we shouldn't be at the top. I've found that out the hard way in one organisation, but at the same time, I think it's always good to have a leadership model or a development of leaders that understand all of these pieces within the puzzle, and how entrepreneurs can contribute to that puzzle.
Is that because I have no lived experience in what they call incubators, but so are you trying to say, and just hear me out on this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're saying in lay terms is that you and others like you that pursue what you spoke with me offline as a social entrepreneur, that you might set up an organisation or business and then put the right people to lead that business. It's not necessarily you, and that you don't necessarily need to be the driver of it up front in a more public sense. Is that what you mean, that you can have people running an enterprise that you've created, be that a social enterprise or a for-profit or whatever the enterprise happens to be, that you can be that the thinker, the innovator, the one with the foresight, the possible futures sort of person in the background?
I think so. Depending on the entrepreneur and the venture itself. Again, I've found with committees and boards, it can be challenging to drive that innovation culture if the board that's being put together, the board that's come together doesn't understand innovation. So, yeah, that's a recent experience and I suppose a current experience where I'm finding, say, as a founder, I've put a board together before with pieces or individuals that I thought would contribute to a good mix, so that I could take the step back. That worked okay. But I think what we found with the strategic plan was that it was I think it was left to one person because it was assumed that that creativity and that sustainable business model was my thing, not everyone's thing. And this concept of digital leadership, which I'm really liking the idea of, is it's kind of bringing people together to have that voice, bringing the right people together, I should say, and the right mix of contributors that understand how important collaboration is to sustain organisations like these new social ventures that are becoming very mainstream. And looking at that triple bottom line model, again, one of my bugbears is how an organisation can sell that to the public, not just sell it, but how they actually embed it and ingrain it into their organisation. And not because they employed one person that was long-term unemployed, but that's their strategy moving forward, so that they can own that as a strategy, not just say that, hey, we're going to do this for one person and that makes us a social enterprise. And I think that's where I found it quite challenging to not only recruit people to be on a board or a committee that believe in those same values, but it's almost a process of kind of picking the people, bringing them together, and then using, say, a design thinking process to create understanding how they can move forward with making the right decisions. And I think for myself, where I'm finding it quite tricky is, yeah, I want to lead and yeah, I want to be the person that makes those decisions, but I get that at times I can't be, because I'm trying to be creative, too much stuff in my head to be able to kind of process.
Your contention, your argument is that there's a tension between being the leader entrepreneur and being innovative. Like there's some kind of tension between those two disciplines in your mind. And I before you answer why I picked that as a particularly interesting statement is I've tried, and I will ask you this further down the themes about that. If entrepreneurs are innovators, and I'm sure you're going to have a nuanced response to that I assumed before starting these podcasts that automatically all entrepreneurs were innovators. Now, I've interviewed a lot of you, and I'm not getting a consistent yes, we all believe we're innovators. Some believe they're very much on the cusp of being good innovators, and some taking existing ideas or systems and just making them a little better or a little different, and so that's their contribution to their particular enterprise. So it fascinates me that there's a potential tension there. If there's not, that's cool too. But am I picking up that vibe there, that there may be a tension between creativity and innovation and the leadership function? And that's not to say, so please, if for those that are listening, that you can't be a leader, an entrepreneur, and not be innovative or have ideas and be creative. I'm just suggesting that maybe some of us are hardwired to have creativity and innovation, not in the amounts that might be needed to catapult your organisation or your business to the next level. Is that fair call, Scott?
Yeah, it is. Look, I think I've always kind of considered creativity. It's a key ingredient to be an entrepreneur. And my take is that the ecosystem needs to involve creativity and innovation before entrepreneurs can spawn and born their ideas. Creativity and innovation doesn't just come from nowhere. We need to grow that concept and challenge people to think. There might be the argument that entrepreneurs will always identify that niche market, but my counter argument is, in what situation was that person put in to develop that concept? Was it that they were in a scenario where they analysed it for 5 years working for somebody, or was it a gap in a market that they noticed was being kind of covered within another country, and that's how that country's entrepreneurs kind of took that product to the next level, or that service. So I really use the design thinking model to uncover that. But I think from a leadership point of view, I honestly don't feel like I've got the space in my brain to put on. I'm a leader. I'm creative. I'm innovating, and I'm going to kind of pursue an entrepreneurial venture. I like the idea of being able to do it, but I think something's like it's a juggle. One of the balls are going to drop, and it might be that the venture, to me, is the obvious one that drops. Like I've found that if I stall my creativity, I might kind of think of other ideas in other areas, which tends to become a form of procrastination for me, rather than kind of leading and doing what needs to be done, say in an enterprise where we're scaling a product or service that we've innovated and have developed an entrepreneurial startup in that space. And look, sorry, I use the branding entrepreneur really carefully after studying a course that was branded the Bachelor of Business Entrepreneurship Program. Because we had a number of graduates that walked out going, "Hey, I'm an entrepreneur." And I'd go, no, you just studied a course. Where's your portfolio to tell me that you're an entrepreneur? You've been a business coach? No, that's not an entrepreneur. So I think for me, it's been a number of influences along the way that have, I suppose, given me the understanding of what I think are, where innovation plays a role, creativity, hand in hand, and how that brings us into this space of entrepreneurship.
So it's not a wasted conversation, and I'm intrigued and fascinated with that response, and we could have many more podcasts just on that response alone, but we're not going to. But one of the drivers in my head for asking that question, and again, if this helps people that are listening think about this, even if for a microsecond, I think it was well worth asking, is that I get pretty annoyed with the amount of marketing there is around come to this workshop and experience real innovation, or come and listen to these 5 gurus and they'll talk to you about innovation in your industry, or they'll critique innovation in a space. And sometimes I've sort of asked myself, well, what kind of street cred, what kind of background do you need to have the nous to get up in front of a group of people, or record a podcast, or record a YouTube video to say this is my critique of people's innovative capacity? I think it's a height of hubris to say that you've got the one that can say this is what is good and bad. I mean, I understand the need for having those workshops, and I guess the scary bit for someone who's, again, and I said this to you offline, and I'll happily say it publicly, I'm an early career researcher, so I've got a lot of questions that may never get answered. But one of them is, if these things are constantly being put up as ways to engage people's thinking, then just how bad is the innovation problem in our industries that we need to keep this theme happening year in and year out? And is there a certain percentage of innovation we need to have before we can say we are driving innovation? Like, am I 5% innovative? Is that enough for what I do? Like, I know you're laughing, and I want to laugh out loud too, but I think there's something in this question, and it keeps bugging me, that if status quo is not good enough in terms of driving new ideas, and if our leaders aren't being able to access that, is it because you're not giving yourself enough time to think about the bigger picture questions for you to work in that creative space? Do we not yet have the culture across some of our industry sectors to allow those conversations to take place in a meaningful, productive way? Is it all of the above? I don't know. And for those listening, in case you do want to reach out and strangle me, I'm just asking questions here because I don't have the answer to these things. But I've talked to enough really intelligent people, a lot more intelligent than myself, my guest included, by putting that out there to say this is a problem for me. And is it just a problem for me, or is it am I overthinking it?
Oh no! Look, I think, without putting, without going into really different areas, the way I look at innovation, it's probably like one of those systemic issues that we've just experienced across the world in the last kind of 2 months. People are fearful of something that they don't understand. When they hear the word entrepreneur, that's still kind of conceptualize risk taker. They may not kind of conform to normal rules or boundaries. When you put innovation in that conversation, I think people, whether it's in a bureaucratic space or like the public service space, I think innovation has a particular model, and that model is really starting to kind of take place. I'm seeing in say, Sydney, New South Wales design space right now. It's kind of really, really exciting. Victoria, it's getting there. Queensland isn't probably too far behind. And for me, that's probably where this new innovation conversation is heading. I'm a little bit frustrated that Malcolm Turnbull coined the term about 7 years ago, because the innovation, I think the term has fallen off the radar, and we potentially don't use the word innovation anymore. We use the word design. And this concept of designing means that we use creativity and I suppose it's an innovation thinking model to bridge the Rogers model diffusion gap, so that we can bridge that gap that exists in order to start seeing adaptation of products and services. And that's where the entrepreneur exists. They're that person that is finding out how to get a venture, whether it's a product or service-based venture, over that gap with their design approach. And I think this concept is that there's a few words that systemically we're scared to use, but we use them anyway, and then it draws us into a different discussion. And yeah, look, I think entrepreneurs are always tarnished with the brush in Australia. Gosh, when I studied this back in 2007, 2006, it was the Christopher Skase type scenario. Oh my gosh, are you going to be one of those? And I'd say, well, no, I hope I don't scam anyone. Like, I hope I sell business, I sell a business with products and services that you genuinely want to buy, because I've researched my target market so well that I've filled a void in a niche market. That's what I hope to do, not to scam anyone. But that seems to always be in the back of the mind.
I forgot Christopher. That I'm old enough to remember that name, and yeah, he caused all sorts of issues in Australia for those that aren't aware. Mr. Skase. So look, Scott, one thing I wanted to ask, and you've alluded to this through the conversation, so it might be a very quick response, but the most difficult part about being an entrepreneur?
Convincing my family that it's a legitimate, sustainable business model, and that it won't burn me out. They're probably like 2 points that I grapple with every day, with every question that I ask myself about any venture that I'm looking to pursue. And my current venture is very much exactly that. I've set it up in a way that I'm not expecting to burn myself out like I did my last two ventures. And again, the aim is to be of, I suppose, a sound mind throughout the entire process, so that I can model that to other startups and to other innovators or entrepreneurs that say, how do you do this? And I give them the scenario of the balance. Because again, I've witnessed programs where they suggest you give up your day job, and then you work 100 hours a day on your startup. And there's not 100 hours in the day. We know that. It's
nothing that I haven't been advised by those other entrepreneurs that have been on the podcast, and other leaders really, that to trying to balance your time and trying to live a human normal life outside of the business can be difficult, and there's often very good reasons for that, particularly if it's your project and your baby, for want of a better expression, that you want to look after it and nurture it and watch it grow. And like unfortunately some people, you become a helicopter parent and you're there all the time, and you can't cut the umbilical cord. And I think that be the difficulty about having an idea, because I guess as an entrepreneur, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're always looking in some respects to the next challenge or the next adventure, because the current venture won't be it. Hopefully that there'll be other things that you can do. Is that part of the tension there, that there's always something else you can be thinking about?
Yes. I always have in the back of my mind my exit. So what's my exit from this current startup? Or if I pursue a product, which I've been considering for the last 3 years, a product-based venture, what's my exit? Because I don't want to do it and then just kind of do it for 2 to 3 years and not have anything that can be either sold or passed on to someone else. Like I'm always looking at what that stage will be, so that I can have that security back in my life, which is that balance. I've got 2 young boys, so I don't want to be.
My condolences. I understand what that means. So again, very much related to that last theme around difficulties in doing what you do. Measuring success. Give me some metrics around what you think success is for you.
I think I've got a couple of points that I look at for success. Initially, one is to build a venture that can replace the wage that you may have had. Like I normally look at that from a sustainable point of view until it is that I can transition out. That becomes a measuring point for me and the success of the venture. If I can't do that within 12 months, then I scale it down and then either head in a different direction or kind of migrate it completely to something else. From a social point of view, I've always had kind of my triple bottom line that I've focused on. So having a sustainability outcome and a focus point to make sure that if I can't encourage, say, a percentage of users that we might be targeting to understand more about being sustainable and the way that they support the environment, then I feel like we're not making any inroads. The other parts are purely because I ran the educational company for 10 years. Again, I found that if we didn't have students graduating from our courses and then moving straight into industry and taking on industry roles, which is, I suppose, the point of how we were being a different provider in the RTO space, then for me, we weren't meeting the requirements that we set out to achieve. And essentially that's why I stopped. I finished running my educational company at the end of last year because I found that whilst the RTO regulations were changing, some of the goals that I had in that space were unachievable. So we finished up the teachings of the students that we had, which was close to 200. We finished everyone up. We had them completed, and now I think our stats show us that we've got around 75% of those guys working in those roles that they studied. And one of my KPIs when I started in the education space was to make sure that we had a successful completion rate that equated to people working in the roles that they studied above 60%. So I was happy to walk away from that space, achieving that. Having worked in the TAFE space prior to that, I know that the statistics aren't that close. So
yeah, look, and it really does depend on the kind of program that kind of success rate, and that can fluctuate with things well outside your control. So I can understand why you would have that as a measure if you've got an education enterprise under you and wanting it to succeed. Scott, let me ask you this: entrepreneur capabilities. What in your mind are, let's say, the top 3 capabilities that you need to be a what I would call, let's call it an effective entrepreneur, because you're never going to have a perfect entrepreneur. So in terms of, if we use the catch-all effectiveness, well, what are those capabilities that you think, and they can be more than 3, it could just be the one, I don't know, I'm learning as I go here. So what, from your perspective, what would they be, mate?
They've got to be really good time managers. So just to manage the time of theirs, their teams essentially, at home life. Problem solvers, got to be able to solve problems on the go. If you're a one-person team or a 10-person team, I think that ability to problem solve needs to be within the culture of the startup venture, so that we don't just get stuck and, hey, let's call IT and they're going to tell us that we have to turn the computer on and off anyway. So why not problem solve that? I'll add in leadership, because I do think that there is a strong component that entrepreneurs have to understand leadership, and it's not that Elon Musk was lucky. I think that he was a leader without really knowing that he was able to bring people along from a transformational point of view. To his later time as a leader within organisations, maybe not, but I still feel that entrepreneurs, if they understood that importance of leadership, it could be a really good characteristic. And then I'd say the ability to be vulnerable, just to own your mistakes, to put your hand up and say, yeah, I got that wrong. I think is something that probably a lot of society doesn't understand the value of owning a mistake. I've owned all of my last 3 ventures mistakes in the last kind of 5 to 10 years. And it's something that I talk to a lot of people about, because that's the one thing that people go, oh, how much money did you make as an entrepreneur? And I tell them within different ventures, and they go, oh, okay, didn't realize that. And then they say, well, why is it that you stopped doing business A? And I said, well, because I made a few mistakes and I needed to rectify those. And another venture, there was some other vulnerable areas that, after kind of a long reconciled process, I worked out, wow, I would have done so many other things differently. So I feel that being vulnerable is a really probably important mix. Yeah.
It's more than a little heartening, I've got to say, that and you typify the discussions that I've been having, that money doesn't seem to be the primary motivator. It is important. I'm not going to say that no entrepreneur does this stuff for purely a non-financial reason, but it's good that money is not the primary motivator, and that I guess separates the different classes of entrepreneurs, because on your LinkedIn profile you've got you're a social entrepreneur, which I think may be different to what some might say that they're an entrepreneur but don't have any other ways to describe the entrepreneurialism that they pursue. So yeah, it's always been interesting to me that in that social space, that the payoff is better practice or better environmental outcomes, or whatever the better that you're aiming to do is, maybe a better migration outcome for immigrants into the country if you're running a social enterprise. It amazes me the things that drive people to do some of the things that they do, and obviously you hope you can make enough money to keep yourself sustained, and like you said before, that you have enough balance in your life so that you're seeing your family go through their growth process, because you can have some problems with it. One of my podcast guests suggested that when he got rid of his first very profitable startup and sold it for many millions of dollars, he realized that he'd been cheating on his spouse. And he said this on the podcast. And when I heard this, I went, do we want to be talking about this? He goes, yeah, I was cheating on her with the business, that I was devoting too much of my time to the business and not enough my relationship. I went, oh, I got the metaphor, obviously, but until he said that, I'm like, oh, okay. So there is, and I think it's more acute amongst you crazy kids in the entrepreneurial space than people like myself. As a CEO of a organization, I have members and I answer to a board, but at the end of the day, this organization's been in existence for 100 plus years. I'm one of many people that have been in this role. Some will say for the better, some may not say that, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I welcome critiques. When you get to a certain age, and I've said this, I've only just started realizing this year as a middle-aged individual in the world of work, I've gotten to the point now where I don't care about some things, and the biggest one is critiquing, being critiqued, and being able to admit a mistake, because it takes that load off your shoulder that you have the mistake, as long as you can admit it, and as long as you can do better from owning that mistake. I think it's a wonderful thing to not have so much ego in the way that you can't admit that you've made an error. Particularly, and this is for me as an advocate in my industry, I'm managing other people's money. So I've got to be. I have a dual level of obligation that some people don't have, whether they're aware of that or not. And you haven't mentioned anything in this space, but I'm really interested to hear this, because you said you've had multiple different enterprises. So I'm sure you've met some interesting people along the way. Has mentoring played a part in your journey, Scott?
Yeah, it absolutely has. That's a good point there, Eric. I think with my different mentors, so I probably find I've got a couple of my academic mentors that I still stay in contact with even now, and they help shape kind of project directions. I'd probably go back to my dad as being my spiritual mentor. My father isn't from Australia, so his Maori heritage plays a big part in the way that I develop my social perspective. And for a long time, I didn't really understand why I had this need to want to share my kind of wealth with other people, or my not such wealth as in money, but the opportunities that I was creating with other people. And it wasn't until he kind of explained this analogy that we'd been doing for decades, when I was a little kid in New Zealand, when we'd go fishing in Mahia, which was the peninsula of Hawke's Bay, where he's from, the tribe. And we wouldn't just go fishing for ourselves, we'd go fishing. And it was, I think this concept didn't take me probably till last year to actually grasp and actually understand the meaning behind what he'd been telling me for a long time. So we'd go out and we'd get pippies. I love pippies. I have them raw straight off the beach. Sorry, not allowed to have them off the beach. I get in trouble for that. Or straight back to the accommodation, the batch, and we'd have them, and he'd always say, hang on, don't just, you've got to leave some for everyone else. And it wasn't until this one time we went out, and I grabbed a bucket for myself, and he said, all right, well, let's just make sure that we've got enough. So we grabbed 2 buckets. And I said, why is that, Dad? And he said, oh, well, look, it's not just for you. Your catch you've got to share with your community. So these are the people that are kind of near and dear to our family. So we'd walk home with these 2 buckets, and we'd go into the 7 houses along the way and say, hey guys, here's a feed of pippies. That's what we did. Because it was that, I suppose, that concept of you share what you reap, and then that gets passed on. So then when they go into town, instead of say just buying some meat for themselves, they'd buy some, they'd bring it out for kind of everyone. It was very much this shared communal concept that was, I suppose, the Maori way. And I didn't understand this for a long time. I just thought, wow, this is taking a long time to get home, Dad. Why can't we just walk home and have these pippies? And he'd kind of say to me, look, this is the way, without sounding very Mandalorian there.
Oh, wow. So for the sake of the listeners, this is the second time a Star Wars reference has been dropped in the podcast. Hey, I'm tragic for the series as well, so I just find it funny. I just clicked after you said it, so that's great. And look, you're the first, possibly maybe the second, to be honest, in the podcast that's brought up any kind of cultural dimension to your leadership. So my background is from South America. My parents migrated here just after Pinochet was installed as a dictator in Chile. They got out late 70s, and so I'm a first generation migrant to Australia. And the thing that I found growing up was that I built from seeing this from the family. So very similar to your story there, Scott, that the extended family, the group, is almost as important as the nuclear family you've got, because they can be an extension of the family in a very big way. So I'm still very close to my cousins, my aunts and uncles, but also friends of friends that have been brought into that circle, my friends that have grown up in that grouping. And so it's that need for community, that need for being loyal to the group are now, some people take that to extremes, and I would put my hand up and say that I don't like the group being attacked in any way or things undermining that sense of community, because it gives a different perspective to how you manage people and learn how you manage relationships. And I think the better part of what you said you can take into your work life and build for the people around you. One, it makes for a better headspace. Two, a lot better karma. And three, you can go home thinking that this whole venture is not just about you. And it's a very trippy way to look at what you're doing, and it's not always what people have in the front of their mind, and that's fine too. I mean, I'm not making judgments, obviously, but it's a very different way to look at things, and it's can be quite a positive way to look at those things. So just out of curiosity, have you been back home, and do you think now in the travels that you've had as an entrepreneur, that do you think your cultural heritage has helped shape the way you think more consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah, so I think my cultural heritage has unconsciously shaped my perspective. So it's been it hasn't been something that I've been always thinking about. Like I've been wanting to learn Māori for, what am I now, 37 years, and having travelled to, say, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and being a part of social enterprise ventures in those countries, I've always found this, I suppose, this notion of being a part of Indigenous cultures really quite easy. I suppose that process of understanding and being able to listen, not just walk in and tell or talk. I've found something that's I think my cultural heritage has taught me without me even realising. So it's almost like I suppose my spiritual connection to my Māori whānau is that's the one lesson that it's provided me. And then again, having grown up in Australia, I've learnt a number of kind of environmental, situational outcomes with regards to how I talk about other cultures, other Indigenous people. Obviously, here in Australia, we have I have a big respect for our First Nations people that a lot of my peers don't understand. And so I often have that conversation with friends and family, and it's not always met with the type of reply that I expect, because of other obviously systemic issues. But I think that's one thing that it's really taught me, that ability to be empathetic and to listen rather than to just jump in and start talking.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I was watching, I don't know what the show was the other day, or maybe it was a radio or podcast, where the person speaking was saying there's a reason whoever or whatever created us gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's to listen more than we speak. And that's often difficult for most people, I think, but it's good advice that, listening and being empathetic and letting other people share their views on whatever it is quite important, and it's a good leadership trait to have, being able to listen. So Scott, final area, and you flagged this at the start of the podcast, but I thought I'd come back to it. Are entrepreneurs born or made?
They're born. They are so born. No, look, I think over over the years, when I went to RMIT, I was convinced that they were made after my kind of 5 years of being in the traditional system. I was given some tools that I probably wouldn't have come up with myself. But having just recently studied a number of leadership models and putting people into certain environments, not deliberately, but people being in certain environments and understanding how those environments can shape another person, I'm led to believe that they are born, and that it is those environments that give people that perspective, that creativity to explore naturally. It might be from a young age, it might be from an age that's later discovered. And I think once it's discovered, it's not me telling another person that they can be an entrepreneur. I don't think, I know Anthony Robbins does that really well, but I don't feel that that's the model for true entrepreneurship. I feel that people need to be born into that situation somewhat, which often uncovers some level of resilience in order for them to truly uncover those traits that make them an entrepreneur. But like we said, the counter argument is, okay, so if they get to university and the university system guides them on a pathway, then is that a born entrepreneur or is that a made entrepreneur? Which can keep the conversation in loop for hours.
Yeah, and look, it's I often throw this one at the end because I truly believe there isn't a right answer to this, because I could argue in the for the proposition that they're born, not made, and you might take the contrarian position that they are made, and we can provide an amount of evidence. And at the end of the day, I think the more fruitful discussion is that if we can stand back and say there are some people that this is not going to sound very academic, but it's what I know and what I've learned and what others have shared with me, that you will find in your travels some people that are just born to be either very good leaders or entrepreneurs that just have and this is the unacademic bit, the X factor that someone else might not have. But there are some people that I know in my travels that are exceptionally brilliant thinkers, that give them enough information and an environment to thrive in, and they can become world-class thinkers, leaders, entrepreneurs, whatever that is, given the right environmental conditions and some training. So I think there's a good argument for both, and the ability to identify those that do have that X factor, and those that cannot be identified, that can be grown into leadership roles and other things, is quite an important conversation to have, because I have my doubts that under current conditions, and maybe not in all industries, but at least in some of the ones that I'm aware of, that being able to spot talent, it can be a hit and miss thing. And that's to the detriment of the society, because you want the thinkers and those that are out there to at least give things a go, because like government says, government doesn't create jobs, the private sector does, and we need people creating businesses and getting out there and doing something different. So look, Scott, I do appreciate your time. I know we're all busy in this current still COVID era. So for those listening, this has been Eric Perez, your podcast host, and I've been speaking to Scott Douglas, who is the startup founder of Green Lab Futures and a lecturer at the Federation University Australia. Thanks again, Scott. Appreciate your time, mate.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me, Eric. Really appreciate it.